In any given market, the vast majority of real estate investors are typically fighting over a very finite supply of what I like to call ugly houses. Now, you might say, what are the ugly houses? This is what I like to characterize as the ugly house portion of the real estate universe. First and foremost, the most common form of ugly house investing is wholesaling. Next, we have flipping, the fix and flip market, or as my fortune builder friends like to say, the residential redevelopment segment of the investing market. Third, we have the financially distressed properties, foreclosures, and hopefully the short sales that get the banks to agree to a price you're willing to pay. Some of these houses may not be ugly physically, but their financial situation is certainly ugly. And lastly, we've got the REO, real estate owned or bank owned properties. Now let's dig a little bit into the pluses and minuses of the ugly house part or the ugly house universe of the real estate investing business. Number one, wholesaling. These are typically cheap, rundown junker properties. Not always, but typically. I know some folks doing wholesaling out in the San Francisco Bay Area. And while those properties may be run down, they're certainly not cheap. Also, wholesaling is where the investor locates and puts a property under contract for a very low price. Then they assign the contract to another investor or possibly even a contractor for an assignment fee. And typically in a wholesaling game, it's usually measured in the thousands of dollars. Again, know people out in the San Francisco Bay Area where prices are just off the hook totally. I had a student who did a wholesale transaction and earned over $250,000 on it. But your typical wholesale house is a small, relatively inexpensive, beat-up property that a wholesaler will put under contract and then sell the rights to the contract or assign the rights to the contract to somebody who's actually going to finish the buying process of the property. And they typically earn a fee that runs into the several thousands of dollars. Now, the good thing about wholesaling, you don't need money to purchase the product, the properties. That's why so many people tell beginners in this business that you got to start in wholesaling, got to do wholesaling, because it doesn't require any money. It's kind of true, but it's not totally true. If you're going to be successful to any degree in any form of real estate investing, wholesaling included, you're going to need to have money to spend on marketing, set up your business, maybe get yourself some formal education, etc. The negatives of wholesaling are a little bit more numerous than the positives. Number one, in my never to be humble opinion, this extremely crowded segment of the real estate game is ugly as the houses are sometimes. The competition is often vicious in the wholesaling end of the game. I like to characterize it as the wholesalers being starving dogs fighting each other for the last scrap of meat out on a street corner somewhere. In a market where a lot of wholesalers are operating, and that's pretty much every real estate market in the country, the competition can get to that level and the profits dwindle, tougher to get deals. You see how that goes. Second, the buyers and sellers are sometimes untrustworthy. What do I mean by that? Well, you folks who've wholesaled a lot out there, you all tell me the stories about when you go to put a property under contract, the person who's selling it swears that they're the owner of the property, and that they've got the original contract on it, or they're actually the owner. And then you come to find out down the road that there are like 6 or 7 or more people daisy chained behind you on that property, where everybody's got the property under contract, marked it up a little bit, and contracted to the next guy, the next guy, the next guy, and you're like number 6 or 7 in line. That's on the seller side. On the buyer side, I hear plenty of stories about folks having a quote-unquote cash buyer who, when it comes time to close and they really need them to get that deal closed, all of a sudden turns from a cash buyer into a broke buyer. They didn't have the money. They screw up the closing. You lose your fee. Back to the assignment fees, the profits are typically low. Again, not 100% of the time, but when you're wholesaling typical houses in typical areas, your profits are usually limited to the thousands, the single-digit thousands, not the tens of thousands, typically. With the flipping, the rehabbing business, that is a business where you buy cheap junker houses, you fix them up, and you sell them at retail and hopefully make a profit. Now, this is what most people, the people I call civilians, the normal everyday people who have never been to war in a real estate business, this is what most people believe real estate investors do. You know, when you say real estate investor to a bunch of civilians, the first thought that pops in their mind are the Flip This House TV show people. They buy cheap junker houses, they fix them up, and they sell them to an owner-occupant, hopefully at a profit. Now, the negatives of flipping is, there's several. Number one is it requires capital and sometimes lots of it. Now, the capital means lender headaches and serious risks. What I mean by capital is this. You have to get the money to purchase flip houses. You can't put them under contract and then fix them and sell them and, you know, use the buyer's money to pay for it at closing, because one of the iron rules of thumb in the investing game is that you don't spend any money to fix a house you don't own. So you have to own these houses. Whether you, God forbid, sign a mortgage yourself, go to a hard money lender or a private lender to get the money, or write your own check, God forbid, number two, that you write your own check to buy these things, you have to come up with the money. And again, that has its headaches and it means risk. If you make one mistake with especially a higher dollar fix and flip project, you could be locked into a loss, and sometimes, again, with the higher priced properties, the losses can be significant enough to destroy your business. Another negative is that these properties require contractors. You know, unless you're the contractor and you're going to fix it yourself, which brings to mind a whole nother host of headaches. But contractors, you know, you folks out there that have great ones, God bless you. But I think there are probably more horror stories about contractors than there are great stories. And the one thing I like to, the one story or phrase I like to use to characterize the contractor business is that it's the only career I'm aware of where showing up on time and showing up sober puts you in the top 1% of your field. So that's headaches there. The jobs, even, you know, I did a few fix and flip projects myself early in my career. My contractor was a friend. He was excellent. He was good. The quality of the work was amazing. But even a good friend who was great at it had trouble bringing in projects on time and under budget. Number four, these properties are usually given to realtors to sell once the project is finished. Again, that brings a host of problems itself. For all my realtor friends out there, for all of my realtor clients, you know I'm not talking about you when I talk about realtors in this context. I'm talking about the large percentage of realtors that couldn't market or sell something to save their life if there's a gun to their head and the trigger was cocked back. Imagine, and you flippers out there know this, the ones that use realtors and have had to search for good ones. You spend all your money or all of somebody else's money to get the property. You spend a ton of money to fix it. You go through all of that headache, problem, pain, etc. to turn out a great product. You give it to a realtor who may not be so hot, and you sit there week after week, month after month, wait for them to sell your beautifully finished project, and you watch your profit dwindle away week after week, month after month. And lastly, or number five, your capital is tied up for long periods of time. Even if the project turns out well and you make a profit on it, tying up such large amounts of capital, and if we're talking more expensive homes, you know, if we're talking $500,000 to $1 million or more homes, that's a lot of money to be tied up out there for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, sometimes more. And again, the projects may still wind up making you a profit, but the capital being tied up for a long time, there are limits to the number of projects you could do simultaneously. So that could be a problem as well. And number six, this is the last one. There's little margin for error in the fix and flip business. Again, the higher the price of the homes, the more seriously small the margin of error is. Any mistake could mean a substantial loss that could kill your business, bankrupt you, turn into a huge loss, and just create havoc in your life. The positives of the flipping rehab business, If you do it right, if you hit it on all 8 cylinders, the profits can be substantial. Especially with the higher price homes, you could be talking 6-figure profits for your flip deals. The foreclosure and short sale end of the business. The positives, obviously, there's a potential for heavily discounted purchase prices on these properties. The negatives is that one of the negatives, or the biggest negative, is that dealing with banks is often a long, arduous, unpredictable process. If you've ever been through a short sale negotiation, whether you're doing it or not, depending on the bank, it could take months. Sometimes it could take years. It's been my experience on both ends of that spectrum. And also, seller cooperation is often an issue in the foreclosure short sale part of the business. And by that I mean this. Even if you're able to get a nice house that you can go to war with the bank with to do a short, the banks are going to require a stack of paperwork from your seller, and they're going to require updates on it. And it really is, it's an annoying, difficult package of stuff to put together and keep updated. Unless your seller cooperates with you fully, you could go through a long period of time of working a short sale, have your seller flake on you, and see everything go to pieces with all your time and money wasted. The REO and bank-owned properties, again, the positives are potential for heavily discounted purchase prices. The negatives, the banks are often difficult to deal with. Tracking down the person who you could deal with, getting a deal that makes sense. Sometimes banks are as delusional about the value of a property as the actual homeowners are in non-REO situations. It's something that has to be dealt with. Now, let me say this as a caveat. I don't want anybody to think that I'm trashing wholesaling, fixing, flipping, short sales, foreclosures, bank-owned investing, etc. I have profited from almost all of those different aspects of the business. I know people who have gotten rich in all of them. I'm not saying that these are no good. I'm just saying that they're sometimes difficult at best and oftentimes almost impossible, at worst, to put together a business that fires on all 8 cylinders and does well for you. They each have their shortcomings, and what I'm talking about here today is a different approach to the business. I'm talking about serving the largest part of the seller market, and this is a segment of the seller market that virtually all typical, and I put typical in quotation marks there, typical real estate investors ignore. And I'm talking about the sellers of single-family homes that are in good move-in condition, that aren't financially distressed, that don't need any work, they don't need a contractor, they don't need a nail driven into them, they don't need a paintbrush slapped on them. These are normal, usually professionals, executives, entrepreneurial type sellers who have beautiful homes in beautiful neighborhoods that they're trying to sell. And the sellers of this type of house have one thing in common, and that is this. They don't have an investor option to look to sell their house in the same way that the people with the ugly houses do. Most real estate investors are chasing around the ugly houses. Most average real estate investors don't know what to do with the lead that they get for a home, let's say a $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 home that needs no work. The seller isn't going to take a 60 or 70% of the fair market value offer, and they wouldn't know how to sell and to make a profit even if they could come close to that. These are people whose only option open to them if they want to sell their home is to list it with a realtor or go the for sale by owner route. And we know that both of those have their issues. So what I've done, beginning back in 2004, is I created an approach to this business that gives the sellers of single-family pretty houses, especially the higher-end ones, gives them the third investor option that they've never had. And I've made a pretty good career and set up a pretty nice proposition for these folks to consider when it comes time for them to sell their